So this is probably really bad theology, but sometimes I think that Sunday mornings are affected by the sports that happen on Saturdays and Fridays. And we got the Cowboys, we got the Sooners, we got the Thunder, and most weeks not everybody's winning, but on a week where you get all three teams actually winning, I feel like revival is going to break out this morning. No, I know that's bad theology, but I just wanted to share it anyway. So I hope you had a good Veterans Day this weekend. We have a lot of people in our church family that are veterans, and we want to recognize them and honor them this morning and just say thank you for the years you've spent serving this country. So if you're in the armed forces right now, or if you have been in the past, if you wouldn't mind, could you stand up for just a moment? We'd like to recognize you. We do want to say thank you. You've done a lot that no one knows about, and we believe that a lot of the things we do in this country are because of what you've done. So thank you for your service. Last week I started a series called Be Rich Towards God, and there's been a lot of dialogue and feedback that many of you have had with me and other leaders at this church about this particular series, and so I'm thankful for that ongoing dialogue and feedback. One of the things I said last week is part of the reason we're doing this series is because in January we're planning on launching an ambitious debt elimination campaign where we hope we can partner together as a church to get rid of the debt we have as a church in order to free up more money for ministry. And there's various parts of that project which we're going to talk about later when that launches January 7th. So I don't want to tell you everything now, but I do want you to know, just behind the scenes, leaders of this church are right now thinking about what our pledges are going to be. We as leaders want you to know, both elders and staff, that we're pledging our finances to this campaign. And then we also want you to know that we're being good stewards behind the scenes as far as our normal budget is concerned. We'll have more details about the future of that as we go forward, but we're keeping in mind the normal budget, the special missions contribution, as we think through what this might look like in 2017. So thank you for your dialogue, and I'd ask that you continue to pray for that effort. So have you ever had a problem that you thought was going to be really simple, but then it turned out to be really, really complicated? So quick show of hands from the guys. How many of you in the last 6 months have started a home project thinking it would be simple, but it turned out to be really complicated? Okay, it's like every home project for me. I've never had a simple home project. This summer I had termites, and that was a bummer. I don't like termites. There's little holes on the walls, and so we realized they were termites. Well, I called the termite guy out to my house, and I hate the first question that he asked me. He looks at the holes, and then he says, I wonder what kind of termite this is. And I looked at him, and what I was thinking was, that's a terrible question. What kind of a termite is this? It's the kind of termite that eats your house. It's the kind of termite that sucks the soul out of your summer. Like, what other kind of termite could there be? I didn't say any of that, but that's what I was thinking. And he comes back around and he says, there's lots of types of termites. You can have damp wood termites. You can have subterranean termites. You can have dry wood termites. I had no idea that there was multiple kinds of ways that little bugs could eat your house. It's always interesting when you think something's going to be really simple, but then it turns out to be pretty complicated. So I read a verse about a year ago in my personal quiet time, and Jesus said something that was kind of unsettling. I want to read it to you. Luke chapter 12, verse 15. Jesus says, "Be on your guard against all kinds of greed." Well, I had to sit with that one for a minute because I didn't know there were more than one kind of greed. I had always just assumed greed is when you want something you don't really need. Let's move on. Keep check on that, but we can move on and keep living our Christian life. And Jesus says, be aware of all kinds. As in, there's more than one kind of greed. Just like there's more than one kind of termite, there's more than one kind of greed. And Jesus is saying, you should probably be aware of what version of greed you are most susceptible to. There's greed 1.0. There's greed 2.0. There's greed for kids. There's greed for adults. And every single person, just like they like a flavor of ice cream, every single person has a tendency towards greed. And so for a moment, I want to look at this story in Luke 12, and I want to give you what I think are three kinds of greed that you can get from this story. And really the whole point of this sermon is I want you to think about which of these three kinds of greed you most wrestle with. So if you have a Bible, Luke 12, verse 13, here's how this story starts. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now that's it. We don't know any more background to the story. All we know is that's the story of the man that's approaching Jesus. And what he says in response to this isn't really a positive parable. Now it's interesting because when I read this short, simple verse here, I don't see a lot of problems with this guy saying. We have to speculate as far as the story behind this, but it's likely that you've got these two brothers. Maybe their dads just passed away, and they were going to split up the inheritance. One person was going to get the sheep, one person was going to get the vineyard. One person was going to get the other animals, and they had this plan, and then all of a sudden one of the brothers is saying, no, I'm going to take it all. And so for the brother that's struggling with this is a big problem. We talk about identity theft. This would be inheritance theft, and you would think that this is exactly the kind of thing that someone should go to Jesus and talk about. And that's exactly what it does. He says, Jesus, this is a problem. My brother's, done this to me. Will you tell him that he needs to split the inheritance? And again, Jesus doesn't like this question. In fact, this brings up what I think is the first kind of greed. It's comparing. When you compare yourself to somebody else. Because that's what's going on with these two guys. This guy coming up to Jesus, he doesn't necessarily need that vineyard. He doesn't necessarily need those sheep or that ranch or that house or those clothes. But what he does need is he needs to look as good as his brother. You see, sometimes comparison is what drives us to buy the things that we buy. In fact, think about this for a moment. What's the next big thing you want to purchase right now in life? Like when you're just sitting around daydreaming about your finances and you think, man, if I just had a few $100 or a few $1,000, what's that thing you want to buy? Like, is it a really nice outfit that you saw? Is it a car? Do you want to build onto your house? Is it some great vacation that you really want to go on? Now, when you have it in your mind, now ask yourself the question, why do you want that? You see, for some of us, the only reason we want the car, we want the addition to our house, we want the vacation, we want the clothes, is because somebody else has that. And we want to look just as good as that person. You see, comparison's hard because most people don't realize that they're doing it when they're doing it, and yet it's there. Do you think that the guy coming up to Jesus saying, hey, can you help me settle this dispute with my brother, do you really think he thought he was greedy? Probably not. In the same way, many of us that wrestle with comparison, we don't necessarily think that we're greedy, but according to this story, there's lots of kinds of greed. And one version of that is when you compare yourself to other people. So here's an example of something that we might not realize is driven by the greed of comparison. I want you to think about the wedding industry for a minute. If you were to ask someone in their 60s or 70s to tell you about the day of their wedding, their story would probably go something like, it was a nice wedding, we had a dress, there was a few flowers, we got married at a church. Maybe for some people it's just we got married in a living room. And it was nice and it was pleasant, but it wasn't lavish. But we feel great about our simple wedding. Now, if you ask that same question to anybody who's been married in the last 5 years, they're going to give you a different answer. See, planning weddings today is like planning Broadway musical productions. Like, it's a really, really big deal. I mean, so much thinking and energy goes into planning a wedding. If the girl's not spending 3 to 5 hours on her hair, she's considered a bum. I mean, you've got the quartet at the ceremony. You got to have the string quartet. You got to have like the glass ice, shaped statues to make it look really good. You've got to have the candlelit tables with the centerpieces of the vintage, records from the 1950s. You've got to have the food from Italy, like bringing an Italian chef literally from Italy to, cook your food for you. Everybody's got to go home with the salt shakers that have the bride and groom's initials, engraved on them. I'm sure they'll love that gift forever and ever. You know, the wedding, it gets posted, it gets tweeted about, it gets shared all online. Now, why do you think we're doing this? The wedding industry today is a $50 billion a year industry. Why are we doing this? Does our society hold marriage as like a higher value as it did 50 years ago? No. Divorce rates are just about the same as they've always been. So why are we so driven to have the best wedding in the world? So James K.A. Smith is a great Christian thinker. He's very popular as an author right now among Christian philosophy. So he has a whole chapter in his book about the modern day wedding phenomenon. And here's his summary statement. He says, the wedding industry thrives on competition, novelty, and one-upmanship. And so what he's saying is the very thing which drives us to have lavish weddings is not because we love each other, and it's not because we hold marriage in high esteem. It's because flat out we want to be better than somebody else. And so when it comes to greed, you got to think about in your life, maybe the reason that you want to buy that next pair of shoes, or maybe the reason you want to buy that car is simply because, well, you want to be a little bit better than somebody else. So you ask yourself that question. Is comparison, is that driving my greed? So here's another kind of greed from the story. Verse 15. Then Jesus said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Say that red part with me. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. One more time. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. So here's the second type of greed. Overspending. It's when you buy something with money that you don't have. In fact, I don't know if you've had this happen to you before, but maybe you go on a vacation or a trip, or you're on a date, or maybe it's a shopping spree. And you just don't really think about what you're buying. You think, it's fine, I'll just pay for it later. And you buy a few things. And then a few weeks later, you're looking at your bank statement, or you're looking at your credit card statement, and you're like completely shocked. You're like, somebody stole my credit card. This is not me. And then you look at it a little further, and you're like, oh yeah, I did buy that grill and those 2 Snuggies, and I did buy these things. It happens all the time. We buy things with money that we don't even have. Well, overspending is actually a version of greed. And this one, it plagues our country. In fact, our government started keeping track of credit card debt in 1970. In 1970, our country had $4.9 million collectively of credit card debt. Just a few months ago, we were at $999 billion of credit card debt. I'm not talking about mortgage. I'm not talking about student loans. This is straight up credit card debt. We are at $1 trillion as a nation. The average American adult has about $3,800 of credit card debt. And many people, it's $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 of credit card debt. Why is this going on? It's because we're spending money we do not have to have things that we do not need. Now, you can talk to financial experts, and they'll tell you all sorts of reasons why people get into so much credit card debt. I'll give you my opinion. I think we get into so much credit card debt because we worship 3 idols. We worship the idol of more, we worship the idol of now, and we worship the idol of deal. So let me briefly talk about those. So the other day, I was going through my closet getting rid of some clothes just to take to charity. And I pulled this shirt off the rack, and I remember buying this shirt. It was a nice button-down dress shirt, and I really, really liked it. I bought it about 2.5 years ago. Guess how many times I wore it? 0. Like, what is wrong with me? When I go back to that moment in the store, the reason I bought that is because I was worshiping the God of more. I just need one more nice shirt. If I can just have this one more nice shirt, man, I'll be really content. No, I won't. I was worshiping the God of more. Well, sometimes we worship the idol or the God of now. In fact, I'll give you another silly illustration from my life just this week. I have a small iPod, and it has a special charger for it, and I've lost the charger. And so I use this when I run, and I didn't have it. I looked for it for about 2 days. I was like, this is ridiculous. I need this right now. So I got on the internet, and I ordered one, and the day that it comes in the mail is the day that I actually find the charger that I had lost. Now, if I could have just waited like 24 hours or 48 hours, then I wouldn't have had to buy something that I don't need. But what happened is I got caught up in the narrative of, I need this right now. And that's why a lot of us get greedy and a lot of us spend money we don't have. Now, this third one, a lot of people wrestle with this one. We worship the idol of deal. Like some of you, when you see a deal, like in the next 3 weeks leading up to Black Friday, like you're going to be like a dog at a Whistler's convention. Like you're going to go crazy when you see these deals. Like, oh, I got to get the coupon for this, and I got to cut out this coupon for that, and I saw this Groupon, for this, and then I walk into the store, and oh, this is the best deal ever. Like, it might be a good deal. Like some of you, I bet one of you, there's probably a person that's going to get a $300 lamp for $150 in the next few weeks. But the question is, do you actually need the lamp? Do you need it? You see, some of us, we see deal and we go crazy, and that's why we get caught in this trap of spending money that we don't have. It's because we worship more, and we worship now, and we worship deal. Remember, Jesus said, man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. You are more than your stuff. You are more than what you own. So having more does not make you more content. Jesus warns, overspending is a form of greed. In fact, I might say it this way, overspending is overlooking that which is overflowing, which is the love of God. I'll say that again. Overspending is overlooking that which is overflowing, which is the love of God. So when you get into overspending, what you're really doing is you're trading what God has given you, his love, because you think you need that fancy shirt, or you think you need that fancy car. But you're overlooking the one thing that God says, if you want to be content, you just got to rest in my love. Overspending is a version of greed. And so ask yourself this question, how much does overspending drive your greed? Maybe it's comparison. Maybe it's overspending. Let's look at the third here. Verse 16, Jesus told them this parable. This is really the heart of the story here. This is what he tells this guy who's wrestling with the inheritance with his brother. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. So he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. So here's the third version of greed that you might wrestle with in your life. It's very simple. It's hoarding. It's when you just keep taking stuff and taking stuff and taking stuff, and you never give any of it away. In fact, one of the interesting things about this story that I noticed is, notice what this guy does and does not do. Here's what he does. The ground produced a harvest, meaning that this guy just worked hard. He's not unethical. He doesn't do anything illegal. He doesn't embezzle money. He doesn't steal from other people. The only thing that this guy does is he gets up every day and he works his tail off to get a good harvest. And that's exactly what he gets. He just works hard. And yet Jesus really indicts this guy for hoarding. So what's your reaction to a guy that works really hard, makes money, and that Jesus just blasts the guy? To be honest, I kind of react against that. One of the things that I feel when I read this story is I think, Jesus, how can you be that hard on a guy like this? Like, what's wrong with this? In fact, you might think that about your own financial practices. You might be sitting there thinking, man, I've worked really hard. I've made wise financial decisions. I've got up really early. I've worked my whole life. I've got money now. Why would Jesus light me up for just having money? Doesn't he want me to work hard? Like, what's so bad about making good financial decisions and then saving a lot? Like, what's so bad about doing that? Well, I'll tell you what's really bad about hoarding. The thing that's bad about hoarding is that it's selfish. It's very, very self-centered. In fact, look back at the story. Look at what this guy says. Pay attention to the pronouns here. He thought to himself, this is what I'll do. Or he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. Like if you go read the Greek, it's over and over and over. I, my. All this guy can think about is himself. And this is what happens when you are susceptible to the version of greed that is hoarding. It's that all you can think about is you. In fact, here's two things that happen when you hoard. One is this: no one gets blessed. When you hoard, nobody gets blessed. But then the second thing that happens is you actually get cursed when you hoard. So a guy named Paul Piff did an experiment out of Berkeley, a really interesting experiment. He set up all these hundreds of games of Monopoly, and he would rig them in a way that 1 out of the 4 players would get a special privilege. So out of the 4 players might start with double the money that the rest of the players started with. Or they might get to roll the dice twice as much as other players. Or they might get double the amount of money when they pass go on the board. You can hit that next picture, just showing the Monopoly board. And so he did all these experiments, and what he was actually studying was he wanted to know, what does privilege do to one's behavior? So he studied what did the privileged player do during the game of Monopoly. Well, what he found was that for the first 15 minutes, the privileged player pretty much acted basically the same as all the others. He was really nice, or she was kind, and she didn't, do anything out of the ordinary. But at the 15-minute mark, he started noting all sorts of changes in the behavior of the privileged player. They were louder than all the other players. Their motions were much more demonstrative than all the other players. They ate more pretzels than any other player. They threw out manners. They weren't polite. They weren't kind. It really changed the way that they behaved 15 minutes into the game. And here's his conclusion of the whole study. He said, as a person's level of wealth increases, their feelings of compassion and empathy go down. And their feelings of entitlement, of deservingness, and their ideology of self-interest increase. And so I go back and say, when you hoard your money, not only are you not blessing anybody else, you're also cursing yourself. Because when you hoard, what happens is you are not developing your own character. Hoarding is the easiest way to not be transformed into the image of Christ. In fact, the more you hold on to your money, the more your money has a hold on you. You can't be kind. You can't be generous and loving and patient towards the world when all you're doing is storing up your own finances. You see, what happens for a lot of us is that we actually get addicted to getting more money. You see, I'm not necessarily talking about being smart and having a retirement or having an emergency fund, getting out of debt. Those are good things. But what happens is some of us, we get all those things done, and then money after that becomes a drug. And every dollar we earn is basically a fix, and we can't get out of the trap because we are addicted to the money. And so what we do is we make more and more, and we keep saving it, we keep saving it, we keep saving it because we think that someday we're going to need it. And in the back of our minds, what we do is we pat ourselves on the back. We say, great job. You've worked so hard. All that work ethic and that drive and that ambition. Look what it's got you. And if you're thinking that today, like if you're proud of yourself because you've made so much money, remember what God says to the guy in the parable. God does not say, great job, you worked hard. God says, you fool. Everything that you've gained is about to be lost because you weren't rich towards me. He says, you fool. So, what is it for you? Does greed in your life look like a comparison? Does it look like overspending? Or does it look like hoarding? So Greg Baumer wrote a paraphrase to this parable from Luke 12, and he wrote it in modern-day financial language. It's really, I find it very striking to hear this story with modern-day financial language. So here's what he says. The stock options belonging to a manager vested after a major run-up in share price, And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I already have enough saved to send my kids to college. My house is paid off. I already maxed out my 401k every year. And he said, I'll do this. I'll open up an investment account and create a passive income portfolio, and I'll exercise my options and put my money there. And so I will say to my soul, you have a big enough portfolio to be financially independent. Retire early, plan some vacations, play some golf. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the portfolio you've built, what use will it be to you then? So it is with the one who endlessly builds his net worth and is not rich towards God. What a powerful paraphrase of that story. So again, I ask you, what is it for you? Is it comparison? Is it overspending? Or is it hoarding? Now, at this point, it's kind of a downer, to be honest, of a sermon. It's like we're all indicted. Most people are greedy. But remember, Jesus does end on a hopeful note here. At the very end of the story, he gives us a clue as to if you don't want to let greed be such a part of your heart, like if you want to loosen the grip of greed in your life, then he tells us how to do it at the end of the story. He says, be rich towards God. Now, what exactly does he mean by that? I just want to make one comment about this. Jesus, when he says be rich towards God, this is not some spiritualized, intellectualized attitude that you need to have about God or your money. This isn't just I'm just going to sit here and pray and worship God, and that's how I'm going to be rich towards God. No, if you read the story in context, and it's on the screen right now, if you really want to be rich towards God, it means being generous towards others. Like it's a tangible demonstration of giving away your finances to other people. In fact, that is the main way that you can keep greed in check in your life. Greed cannot hold a candle to generosity. And some people think that the way they're going to deal with greed is just to write about it or tell someone they struggle with it. Yeah, that's a good start. But if you're greedy, and if you've been sitting here thinking, man, I overspend all the time, and I've been hoarding all my possessions, and I compare things all the time. I'm so greedy. If you want the way out of greed, it's being generous to other people. It's the only way to get out of greed. In fact, just last week, we started this series on a Sunday, and later that day, I was talking to just two of my friends, just two guys in their 30s. I was talking about this ministry situation where someone, is in need. I didn't say a lot about it, and it wasn't like a fundraising pitch or anything. Well, later that week, I wish I could tell you more details about the story. Maybe someday I can. To give in the thousands of dollars to this situation. To give in the thousands of dollars to this situation. I was blown away. These people, they're not like millionaires. It's just normal people trying to live life, and yet they realize that if they're going to be rich towards God, it starts with being generous towards other people. One of the most famous verses in the Bible is John 3:16, which says this, "For God so loved the world that he gave." One of the reasons that I think it's important to cultivate a heart of generosity is because that's what God does. He's a giver. And yet the gifts that God gives aren't money. God gives salvation. He offers the forgiveness of sins to people that actually need it. There might be someone in the room, and you've never made the decision to follow Jesus Christ. He's got a great gift for you. It's the gift of eternal life. And you receive that by coming to him, being baptized into his name, and being welcomed into his family. And so in a minute, we're about to sing a song, a powerful song. And if that's your story, come tell me about that. You might have another part to your story. You might just need people at this church to pray for something going on in your life. And if that's you, you can come tell me about that as well. In fact, I'll tell you about the first service. Sharon Kaufman wanted the prayers of our church, and I loved her prayer request. Sharon Kaufman came forward, and she simply said, I'm not being the example to my kids and to my grandkids that I need to be. So I need to get my spiritual life in the right direction. And so we prayed for Sharon. So I don't know what's going on in your life. Maybe this morning you're thinking about your own heart when it comes to money. And maybe you've been convicted that maybe you're an overspender. Maybe you're a hoarder. Maybe you're wrestling with comparison. And maybe the first step for you is to tell the church that you're ready to start a new chapter in your life when it comes to your relationship with your money. Now, if you need anything from this church family, why don't you come while we stand and sing?